It's amazing to me sometimes that I can eat this type of food and lose weight and feel amazing. I really hope you guys enjoy this week's video. In the crock pot here, I'm gonna start some barbecued short ribs. This is usually the first thing I do when I meal prep for the week, is I make sure to put something in the crock pot so that my hands are free to make all of the other meals that I wanna make for the week. If you guys can't afford grass-fed, organic ground beef or beef in general, then just get whatever you can afford. But we buy our own cow every year. Well, not our own cow. We buy our own beef, I should say. We buy our own beef every year, and that way it's cheaper in the long run than buying grass-fed organic beef from the store. So I'm just gonna put this in the crock pot, and then I'm just gonna put in about a 1/4 cup of water, and I put salt and pepper on the top of them too. Let them cook. Okay, so I browned up 2 pounds of ground beef in here, and then I'm gonna add 1 jar of this marinara sauce that I got from Aldi. And since there's 2 pounds, like 1 can of this probably won't stretch over the whole thing. You could just add 1 can. But if you want to add a little bit extra, what I do is take a 1/2 can of diced tomatoes. You want to just be able to add stuff to stretch the amount of food that you have, but not add all of those extra carbs like I say in all my other videos. For noodles, I get these tofu shirataki noodles. They are a great substitute for regular noodles. Some people say that they have a weird texture to them or a weird smell to them. Everybody's different, and so I just bought 1 package initially to try them out, and now I know that I like them, so now I buy like 2, 3 at a time. What I do to prepare these is just rinse them really, really well. I know some people will saute them in just a pan with like oil, or saute them alone by themselves to kind of get rid of the fishy smell. I don't really smell that. I don't know, maybe I just rinse them well enough, but if you don't want to buy shirataki noodles, the other thing you could do is make zoodles, which are zucchini noodles. You just have a zoodle maker. You guys can look that up on Amazon or online. I'm sure you've heard of it. And you can make zoodles like that, or you could do spaghetti squash. And what I tend to do is have the tofu shirataki noodles when everything else isn't in season. And that way I'm still getting a good mix of different foods, and it's less expensive to eat that way than buying these for a couple dollars in the store when squash is on sale. So for example, if I were to add 2 of these marinara jars, it would be 7 times 6 servings. It would be 84 total carbs from the tomato sauce. And instead, I'm gonna add 1 jar of the tomato sauce, or the marinara sauce, and then 1/2 of a jar of this. 1/2 of a jar of this will be probably 16 or 17 extra carbs. And so it ends up being total, let's see, 42 plus 16, ends up being like 58 total carbs instead of 84, which is a huge difference when you're splitting portions up. That's literally it for the spaghetti. Sometimes I'll just eat the spaghetti sauce on its own without the spaghetti noodles, but this is a perfect quick meal to make if you're in a hurry. Okay, so next we're gonna make inside out egg rolls, and I like this recipe because it's great for leftovers. What I'm gonna do is take 1 pound of ground beef and 1 pound of ground sausage. And the reason I say this is good for leftovers is because I made sausage for breakfast last week and not all of it got eaten. So I'm just gonna take the majority of what got left over and use it for this recipe, and we'll have it probably, not tonight, but we'll probably have it tomorrow night so that this food gets eaten up before it goes bad. After I brown the ground beef, what I'm gonna do is add in the leftover already cooked ground pork or pork sausage like this, these little breakfast pork sausages, and I'll add the meat together, and then I'm going to add in 4 cups of chopped cabbage and 2 tablespoons of sesame oil, 4 tablespoons of coconut aminos. You can also use soy sauce. Then I add salt and pepper to taste, and 1 tablespoon of dried minced onion. I'm going to show you what that looks like. Or you could add onion if you have it on hand, but this is nice because it's shelf stable and I don't have to have onions on hand all of the time. A lot of recipes for this inside out egg roll online. I have removed, I think, garlic from the original recipe that I found. I don't even remember where I got it from anymore. But then after everything is combined in the pan, it's kind of like a one-pot meal, which is nice for cleanup. Then I sometimes chop up and put on top slivered almonds because it gives it a nice crunch. Now, this recipe is also great because if the kids have a couple carrots in their lunch from school and they don't eat them throughout the week, then I'll just chop those carrots up and put them in here. And the carrots give it a nice color too. So when the kids are eating dinner, usually if it looks good, it is good, and then they'll eat it. While this ground beef is starting to cook, what I'm gonna do is start working on my next recipe, which is the bacon wrapped meatballs. And that's what I'm gonna do with this other pound of ground beef. Now, I hadn't thought ahead this week very well. Normally I would pull out probably 2 to 3 pounds of ground beef if I'm making meatballs because it takes time to roll everything out, cook everything. So this week I'm just gonna make 1 pound of meatballs, but you could also do these as a prep for future meals and make 2 or 3 pounds of meatballs at a time and then freeze them for later on in the month, and it would save a lot of time on doing that later on. So when I'm doing meatballs, what I do is I roll them up just in a ball, in a small ball. I just take the meat for meatballs. I've done it with pork rinds before, kind of like I do my meatloaf. If you guys want to check out my meatloaf, I did it in my first weekly meal prep video. But for these type of meatballs, what I do is I just roll a ball like this, and then I take a half of a slice of uncured bacon and wrap it around, and then I put it in one of these spots, and that way it kind of cooks from all directions instead of just in one spot. And also it keeps the grease contained. You guys don't need to have a pan like this. If you don't have one, then what you can do is just put it on a regular cookie sheet or saute these in a pan. But this is from Aldi, uncured bacon, and I like that it has 0 carb. There is evaporated cane sugar, but it's not a big amount. So make sure that you're looking for something that's not cured in sugar because the majority of them are. Want to help me roll meatballs? This is a great thing for the kids to do with you too, because once you teach them how to roll meatballs, it really saves a lot of time from having to do it all yourself. And they usually like getting their hands dirty and getting in there. Now that I have all of the meatballs rolled up, then I just take half a slice of bacon like this, and wrap it around. Try to make sure all the sides are covered. And then plop them in the pan. Okay, I don't know how this worked out, but I had exactly the right amount of pieces of bacon, the right amount of spots in the meatloaf, or in the pan. I don't know. Craziness. I didn't plan that. But if you have extra bacon, you can wrap an extra slice around them, or you could just cook them in a separate pan. You guys can always cook these in a skillet on the stovetop, but throwing it into the oven is a nice way to free up my hands to do other meal prep stuff as fast as possible so that I'm not in the kitchen for like 8-10 hours a day. So these will go into the oven for 425 degrees for about 20 minutes, and then I'm going to flip them and then cook them for an additional 10 minutes. Okay, so I have the ground beef all ground up. Ooh. Then I added in that pound of ground sausage. And now I'm just going to add in all of the extras, and I'll have a recipe in the description below for the details on that. Then I'm going to add in that 4 cups of chopped cabbage. Make sure that you don't drain off the meat unless it's like a super fatty meat, because that fat will help the cabbage to break down a little bit and make it nice and soft. And it will soak up all of that flavor. Salt. Pepper. And then I added in all of the remaining ingredients, which you guys can find in the recipe description below. All right, that's it for the inside out egg roll. And next we are going to make some Asian meatballs that I found from Maria Emmerich's Ketogenic Cookbook. Super good and such a different type of meal. The Asian meatballs really have a different type of flavor to them. And it's not something I make on a regular basis, but it is a nice meal if I'm just feeling like something different. From last time I had made meatballs, I found these in the freezer, so I'm just letting these defrost. And then what I'll do is just make the sauce so that I can combine them afterward when we're ready to eat them. So first we're going to do a 1/4 cup of chicken broth. Her recipe calls for beef bone broth, but I don't have any on hand right now. So store-bought chicken broth it is. 1/4 cup of that. And then we need 1/4 cup of coconut oil. One thing I learned with coconut oil was the refined and expeller pressed coconut that you find in the store doesn't have the smell of coconut like the unrefined. So if you don't like the smell or the taste of coconut as much when you're buying coconut oil, make sure that you get the naturally refined one. It is more processed, but I'm not somebody who cares for coconut that much, so. This recipe actually tastes better to me with the coconut flavor, so I use the unrefined kind for this recipe. Then we need 1/4 cup of coconut aminos, or you could use soy sauce. tablespoons of diced green onion. And these are something that I buy only when they're on sale because we don't use them a lot, but also because I can just dice them up like this and freeze them, and it saves money in the long run. And 1/3 cup of powdered Swerve, which is confectioners Swerve. This is pretty expensive on Amazon. I'll put a link so you guys can check it out, but I get it from a local grocer that has it for like $7.99, I think. I don't buy the regular Swerve because I like pure better, since you only have to use half the amount. But this confectioner's Swerve is really nice for making frostings. I also use them in graham crackers. I'm trying to think what else I use on. Mostly like dessert recipes where you need more of a finer powdered sugar type consistency. So 1/3 cup of this, 2 teaspoons of ground ginger, and her recipe calls for fresh ground ginger. I don't have that on hand, and it's not something I use in a lot of recipes, so I'm just using the spice ground ginger. For garlic, she calls for 1 clove of garlic minced. I don't have fresh garlic, and Ethan's allergic to it, so it's really not something I buy. I'm trying to remember the last time I bought garlic. I really don't buy it. So I'm just going to use garlic powder, and she calls for 1 clove. I'm just going to do like 1/2 teaspoon because I'm not a big fan of garlic taste too much, but it does add to the flavor of this recipe. This ingredient is super important, and if you're going keto, this is something that you'll want to have on hand because I use it a lot for gravies and sauces like this. It's perfect for thickening like casseroles, but it's glucomannan. I'll take a picture, and I also talked about it in some of my other videos. It is a thickener, and what you want to do is warm up whatever you're making and then sprinkle this on the top afterward, and use it sparingly because you won't really see how much it's thickening it until after it cools. As soon as everything comes together like this, I turn off the heat, and then I add the glucomannan on the top, and I just sprinkle it over. I'd say it's probably about 1/8 to 1/4 teaspoon, probably more like 1/8. That's what I would start out with, and then as it cools and thickens, you can tell whether or not you'll need some more. Now, this is pretty sweet for me, so I probably won't use as much Swerve next time, and that'll also help cut down on the carb count. But you can see how thick it is from that glucomannan. I only added just a sprinkle over the top, and it's perfect. Now that that's done, we're gonna move on to the pork rind chicken legs. For the pork rind chicken, we're gonna use a food processor to blend up the bag of pork rinds. I normally get the original flavor from Aldi. It's a 3.5 ounce bag. You could also use hot and spicy if you like that flavor. Today I'm gonna use barbecue flavored ones that I got at Walmart. You could also put these in a plastic bag instead of using a food processor and just hit it with a rolling pin or grind it up that way. You just want to make sure that you have really fine pork rinds. Then I'm going to pour this onto a plate and roll the chicken in it before I bake it. After I get the pork rinds ground up in the food processor, I just take a package of chicken legs like this and put them into the pork rinds, and then I put them on a baking tray. And make sure when you're baking them that they're raised from the grease, because then they'll get crispier. And you just dredge them in the pork rinds like this. Make sure that you coat them nice. And I have used fresh grated Parmesan cheese before too, and that was really good. I know some people think that they don't have time to meal prep on Sundays, and really this is something that I started more when I went keto, because it saved me time the rest of the week. But before I started videotaping my meal prep, what I did was I listened to podcasts or YouTube videos or stuff like that to make the time go faster. And generally, when I was just meal prepping without videotaping, it would take me probably 3 hours or so, depending on if I had veggies for that week. If I had vegetables to cut up, then that took a little bit longer. Now that I'm videotaping, it probably takes about 5 hours or so, because I can't cook and have stuff sizzling in the pan and you guys be able to hear me at the same time. So I have to pause in between, finish stuff up, and then hook all my equipment back up. But it's worth it. I definitely want to help other people if they're looking to transition their lifestyle, to see how possible it is. I remember I was always somebody who was like, you gave up sugar? I could never do that, you know? That was always my response was, wow, that's awesome. I'm so happy for you, but I could never do that. And it really is possible. And you can still enjoy like really delicious foods, which is awesome. I always thought that eating healthy meant like having dry chicken, like dry baked chicken with veggies, and it's not like that at all. Like, I love eating burgers and chicken legs like this. I just think it's so cool that there's a science behind like how to lose weight, because before I just thought it was always like exercise more, eat less, kind of like what we've always been told by, you know, follow the food guide pyramid and all that. Like, that's not how to do it. And it's sad that we've kind of been conned or tricked into living our lives that way, and all these health issues are coming up because of it. And I'm super thankful that I found this way of eating. So I'll bake these at 425 degrees for 60 minutes, and I'll flip them every 20 minutes. Now what I do to save on time for dishes later is I line my pan with tin foil, and that way all of the grease just drips onto that, and I can lift it off and just suds it down after. I don't have to scrape off all of the grease and stuff. Here's what the bacon wrapped meatballs look like after I pulled them out from being cooked 20 minutes. You can kind of see how much fat has drained off, and the bottoms aren't cooked. Just want to take these off, put them on a paper plate, drain off this grease that is in this pan, and then put them back in the opposite way so that they can cook the rest of the way. Okay, so I have these all on a paper towel on a plate, and I drained off the grease, and I'm just gonna plop these all back into the pan here. All right, the bacon wrapped meatballs are done. I cooked them at 425 degrees for 20 minutes. Then I took them out, drained off the grease, flipped them, put them back in the pan, and baked them at 425 degrees for another 10 minutes. So I had these on low for about 6 to 8 hours, and you can see how nice and tender they are. And then we just add barbecue sauce to this, or the kids have it with ketchup sometimes. And I literally just threw them in the crock pot for 6 hours. So a super easy meal. And here's how the chicken turned out. It was super crispy and delicious, but this meal is better fresh and not as a leftover. It ends up being like 58 total carbs instead of 84. I think I said 84. I mean, that's taking off, gosh darn flies. 42 plus 16, 52. I'm not the best at math, but it adds up basically. Then I add carrots. Now you can chop these. I add beef all browned up. Ooh. Can you see my head? Is it cut off?